I want to talk about Samsung really quickly. Samsung and their growing chip empire. Make sure y'all hit a like for the YouTube algorithm, subscribe to the channel, and turn on your notifications. Let's continue with the conversation, y'all.
Samsung is a brand name that's everywhere, in more than 100 million US households. Android phones, TVs, refrigerators, microwaves, and unconventional displays.
So the 13-inch display can be as
Wow.
big as 17-inch. This is the future of display.
But there's a huge, lesser-known side of Samsung that lately has made it one of the world's most important and valuable companies.
A lot of people only look at Samsung, right? And I want y'all to understand this money, right? Because it's easy to talk about the gossip. It's easy to talk about YK Osiris. It's easy to talk about Suki Hana. But then how are you then capitalizing off of the information? And how do you then see what you see happening and playing out in society because you don't truly understand what these companies are doing or what their vested interest is and what's happening in your everyday life? For example, Apple makes their own chips. They moved away from IBM in order to make their own silicon. The M1, the M2, the M2 Pro, and all of this other type of stuff. Reading super chat shortly. Shout out to Brittany. Shout out to Hinofit. I appreciate y'all. There's so many different things that these companies are into. When you think about LinkedIn, do you think about Microsoft? When you're thinking about OneDrive, do you think about Microsoft? When you think about Xbox, do you think about Microsoft? When you think about PlayStation, do you think of Sony? When you think of the cameras that's on the iPhone, do you think of Sony? When you think of chips, do you think of Samsung or do you only think of Android? I want y'all to open up your mind a little bit more so that you can understand what's happening and why these companies have a vested interest and what's going on in society.
It's not just making devices, it's making the chips that power them.
People probably don't know that we've led memory for 3 decades.
Samsung is the leader in memory chips. Think long and short-term data storage.
They are the titan. They have, nearly 50% share in both DRAM and NAND.
And it's the world's second biggest maker of the most advanced logic chips, the kind in Teslas, supercomputers, AI, smartphones, and so much more.
I bet you didn't know that Samsung was really a chip company. You thought that they were a TV company. You thought that they were only focused on Android phones and all of this other type of stuff. You thought that they were only a screen company and that they were focused on TVs. You thought that they were trying to compete with Apple with tablets. I bet you didn't know that Samsung was quite possibly the biggest chip maker in the world. But because you are uninformed and then you don't really pay attention to what's going on from a financial understanding, or you're not letting it come back to you and understanding where the money is going, you don't do your research. When I dropped the video inside of the Patreon of the 8 things that I look for when I'm looking to invest in a company, the 8 things that I'm looking for when I'm looking to invest in a company, it would take you through this process so that you can better understand who it is running these companies, what they do, what their long-term vision for this company is, and how it is that you can capitalize off of it as a result of it.
We recently went inside Samsung's Austin chip-making factory, or fab, in the first in-depth tour ever given to a U.S. journalist.
And how many chips are you pumping out every day here?
A lot.
Now it's gunning
won't
to
even say how many
overtake the
chips that they
massive
pumping
advanced
out.
chip leader, Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company.
We do not settle, to be number 2.
It ended 2022 with $245 billion in annual revenue.
In 2022, they ended with $245 billion in revenue. Whew. I mean, they make chips for every single thing that you can think of, from all of the different screens and the different technology that goes inside of your cars, to the computers that you use, to the screens that you're using on your TVs, to the chips that's inside of some of y'all phones, to the refrigerators, y'all smart refrigerators, and every single thing that y'all can think of, they have a hand in it. But here's the other caveat that I want y'all to think about. How much influence do they have in this country, considering that they are a foreign country that then has a hand in everything that's going on inside all across the world. How are they competing, right? When I have a conversation with y'all inside of the Patreon, and for example, I might say something like, hey, let's break down the different companies and the cloud strategies as it relates to Samsung and Apple and Microsoft and Amazon, right? And I'll say, okay, well, Amazon has Amazon Web Services. And Amazon Web Services is much, much different than iCloud or Google Cloud or even OneDrive and Azure, right? And some of y'all may be thinking about it from a job perspective, but I'm thinking about it from an investment perspective. And when you look at it from an investment perspective, you have to say, well, Amazon Web Services cloud strategy is much different than Microsoft cloud strategy, because although they offer a product that allows for you, the consumer, and even these large companies, when you see an outage that goes on in Netflix, it may come as a result of Amazon Web Services because they are one of the biggest customers of Amazon Web Services. And then they use that data and that information to not only power what it is that they got going on at Amazon, but they use analytics to then do predictive behavior of how people are going to spend money from a buying pattern, right? And then you have to compare it and say, okay, well, Microsoft is competing against Amazon because, for example, they were advocating for Microsoft to get these contracts with the federal government in order to, move everything over into the cloud. But Microsoft's cloud strategy is also slightly different because if you look at what it is that they're doing with Xbox, right? And how you even purchase games. And then buying of LinkedIn, how does that affect the whole strategy? And then moving into the software category and the subscription services, which then start to filter into what Apple is doing, because Apple is not necessarily offering cloud infrastructure services over to other companies, but they're using it to power what it is that they're doing, from artificial intelligence to Siri to how it is that they're also pushing out services such as Apple Fitness Plus and Apple Arcade and all of this other type of stuff. And, their strategy is much different than Google Cloud, which is trying to take over a little bit of what Amazon Web Services, and they're trying to compete with Azure. But then they're trying to also power their same products in order to continue to push things out to consumers, right? And so when you start to have these conversations, you start to break down how money works and what these different strategies are so that you can make an informed decision as to what company that you want to invest in, because it's not entirely based off of whether or not they're competing with each other on these phones and devices, but they may be working with each other because one is a lot more technologically advanced in one specific segment that they have expertise in than the other, right? PlayStation may be competing with Xbox and Microsoft, and they may be winning in the gaming console wars, but then who suffers? GameStop, right? Because GameStop is now going to have no product to sell to the consumers, which is one of the reasons why they were being shorted during the pandemic in the first place when everybody was staying home. Because the only thing that they had to sell was the consoles. But who else was selling the consoles? Walmart, Best Buy. You have no reason to go into these places because now those are dying business models, because not only are people getting things delivered to their homes, but they no longer have a reason to go into those places. GameStop don't sell games no more. You download them straight over into your console, which is also one of the reasons why cloud infrastructure is so important, because they need you to be able to re-download those games. When you then switch over in your phone, right? If I lose my iPhone and then I go over and get another iPhone, all I got to do is sign in, then everything automatically downloads straight from the cloud. When you talk about backing stuff up, when you talk about YouTube, right? YouTube literally uploads billions and billions and billions of hours worth of content every single day. Where is this information being stored? Why does it cost so much money? And why is YouTube then moving over into shorts instead of continuing to allocate money over into videos and live streams, right? You have to start thinking differently, and then you'll understand where it comes back to the money. When you understand how the money works, then you make more informed decision as to where it is that you invest your money. Sorry, I went off on a little bit of a tangent, but I get passionate about these things when we start talking about the bag.
For context, that's $47 billion more than Microsoft.
Think about it. We laud, I get going with this. We laud Microsoft, and Microsoft is a phenomenal country, largely considered one of the most successful companies of all time. Microsoft has made more billionaires, I believe, than Apple. Don't quote me on that, but I believe that they have, right? Microsoft's revenue in 2022 was $198 billion. Samsung's revenue was $245 billion. That's huge. That's huge. When we talking about money, when we talking about the bag, that's huge.
But since then, prices for memory chips have taken a dive, and they're expected to fall up to 23% more in Q2 2023. In April, Samsung reported dismal earnings for the first quarter of 2023, with profit.
Now, profit and revenue, for those of you that are not familiar, is completely different. Gross versus profit is completely different.
Plunging 95% to its lowest level since 2009. In response, the company cut production of memory chips. But it doubled down on Foundry, the side of its business that makes custom logic chips for outside customers. It's building a $228 billion mega cluster of 5 new fabs in its home country of South Korea, scheduled to come online in 2042. And in the US, where the 52
scheduled to come online in 2042. They're willing to allocate $250 billion in order to invest in what it is that they think is going to be the future of computing to come online in 2042. It's 2023. That's 19 years from now. They're literally investing of what it is that they're going to be making money for in decades. Decades from now. In their home country.
$2 billion CHIPS Act. Samsung dates back 85 years to 1938, when founder Lee Byung-chul started it as a trading company for exporting fruit, vegetables, and fish in Korea.
His vision for our company to be, eternal, strong, and powerful. So he chose the name Samsung, which literally means 3 stars.
To survive 2 major wars, it diversified into sugar refining, construction, textiles, insurance, retail, and it remains a multifaceted business to this day. Samsung Rising author Jeffrey Kane has been covering the company from Korea and the US for over a decade.
If you had transported yourself back into time 60, 70, or 80 years ago and asked the average person about Samsung, they just shrug their shoulders and say, I guess it's a little grocery store in Korea that no one's really ever heard of.
Samsung Electronics, the division it's known for most, was established in 1969. The first Samsung TV came out in 1972. And just 2 years
Brock.
later,
I'm gonna be
Lee
reading
bought
that shortly.
Hankook Semiconductor in a bold move toward making it the vertically integrated consumer electronic giant it is today.
The Lee family is, you could call it, the most powerful family in South Korea. One of the most powerful families in tech.
Samsung's first U.S. offices opened in New Jersey in 1978. And by 1980, Samsung Semiconductor was born with a fab in Korea. By the early 80s, it was making 64 kilobyte DRAM memory and had a new U.S. office in Silicon.
The interesting thing about this stuff, this is the type of stuff that I watch all the time in my spare time, in addition to animal videos, because I'm always studying companies and I'm always trying to understand what their investment philosophy is and how it is that they lean on things that they've learned in their legacy history to continue to go forward. And the biggest thing that I learned from Samsung when I was studying them, because I was looking at them as a possible, target for investment and things like that. Because something that they did has sparked my interest, especially with regard to the Apple Vision Pro, is that these companies don't wait to be out innovated. They're always reinvesting back into the company. They're always reinvesting back into themselves. They're always making capital investments into what it is that they can do next, even decades ahead of time. Samsung will be around for the next 100 years. They were in textiles. You know what textile is? They will be around for the next 100 years. The only thing they care about is reinvesting back into the company so that they can give value back to the shareholders, which is largely controlled by the family.
Valley. Lee's son took over after his father's death in 1987, and its first mobile phone came a year later. Now, Samsung is the world's biggest smartphone provider, often neck and neck with Apple. Just a decade after making its first memory chip, Samsung gained international notoriety with the world's first 64 megabit DRAM chip in 1992, placing it squarely at first place in memory, where it remains today.
Its presence is so ubiquitous in South Korea that they call their country the Republic of Samsung.
In 1996, Samsung broke ground on its big fab in Austin, and it opened another one there in 2007. It got a new U.S. headquarters building in Silicon Valley in 2015, designed to look like a 3-layer stack of flash memory chips.
This is based on 3 nanometer, which is the most advanced technology we have, and this price is almost same as mid-size car.
Han has been with Samsung for more than 3 decades. While its primary chip manufacturing still happens in South Korea, it of course makes them in Texas as well as China. Besides devices, the biggest part of its revenue, some 57%, comes from memory. But as shoppers cut back amid rising inflation, demand has weakened sharply, especially for memory chips. That comes in the footsteps of a pandemic that involved peaking demand and supply chain disruptions, eventually culminating in a global chip shortage.
It was really painful. When you look at your customers asking more chips, but there's no way you can provide that, it was so painful.
But the new reality is far less demand. Smaller memory chip makers like SK Hynix and Micron cut production in late 2022. Samsung waited until April 2023 to do the same.
We are now going through very worse slump in terms of semiconductor demand. And we believe that the market will rebound possibly by end of this year.
Micron and SK Hynix started laying off folks. They've cut their spending on new fabs. Samsung is pushing forward though, and they're not cutting back on spending despite it being unprofitable today.
Between China and the U.S., right, is largely based off of the idea that they're trying to control, which is one of the reasons why there is so much incentive for manufacturers to build factories here in the U.S., which is what the CHIPS Act was on behalf of Biden. There's an incentive and there's a technology war that's brewing that's much, much bigger than what it is that y'all see happening over in Ukraine. It always comes back down to the money. And so Samsung is hedging its bets in that it's always focused on future investment and then future profitability instead of focused on what it is that they're generating right now. And so when you see the stock price and it continues to go up, usually what happens with the stock price is that stock or shareholders or the stock price is usually rewarded by future investment or future opportunity. When you've seen Tesla break out, Tesla had some of its biggest jumps, not when it was actually profitable, right? I would tell you that Toyota, Tesla, Ford Motor Company, and even General Motors are probably generating more profits than they've ever had right now. But Tesla leapfrogged the competition as far as the value of the company because their stock price skyrocketed, not based off of whether or not they were profitable at the time in which they wasn't profitable, but whether or not they were going to be incredibly profitable much later. And so when you've seen them driving the cost out, when you've seen Tesla saying that we're a technology company, usually companies are rewarded based off of their future investment and future profitability and prospects, not based off of what it is that they generate in a day. Shareholders don't reward companies based off of what it is that they're making now. They reward companies based off of where it is that they're going, okay?
In May, China banned products from U.S. memory chip maker Micron, which in turn could boost demand for Samsung. And Morgan Stanley recently named Samsung a top pick. In October, the U.S. did place big restrictions on chip companies exporting their most advanced tech to China. But for now, Samsung and SK Hynix were given a 1-year waiver to operate their existing chip fabs in China.
The Department of Commerce really crafted these rules to make sure that those existing fabs aren't impacted, but Samsung and SK Hynix don't build new fabs.
When it comes to foundry, Samsung is one of only 3 companies in the world capable of manufacturing the world's most advanced chips, ranking second between TSMC and Intel. And with mounting US, China, Taiwan tensions,
Who y'all see over there? Who y'all see walking those factory floors, being wooed and paid for and bought by, and their campaigns is being funded by, and all of this other stuff? Who y'all think that is right there? Who over there walking them factory floors, having a conversation with the CEOs and the shareholders and the board of what's going on over there at Samsung? Biden. We might continue this conversation inside of the Discord. The link to the Discord is attached to any of the most recent videos inside of the Patreon. I do need to read some of these super chats, and I need to get back to the grind and work, because this has been a full show, a dope show, an awesome show. But I just wanted to give y'all a little bit of an insight of how it is that I see things, what you need to be looking for, and how it all comes back down to the money.